What's shakin'? Hey, I'm Rick Jordan. Today, we're going all in. I'm so pumped today because I met this amazing dude at a dinner that I was on a panel and actually hosting with one of the greats, David Meltzer, who's a friend of mine. And we were having such a great conversation at the table during the dinner that we just decided we need to connect and we need to bring a lot of awesome knowledge that my new friend has to the world. So George Chanos is who we have today, and get ready. He is the 31st Attorney General of the great state of Nevada. He's also successfully argued before the United States Supreme Court, which is freaking awesome. But you know what's even better is that he just came out with this new book called Millennial Samurai. He shipped me a copy. I love it. It's laid out just exactly how we consume content these days, which is brilliant. And I'm excited to talk to George Chanos today. What's shaking, my man?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Rick.
It's so good to have you. I love just the regular conversations, you know, and just like we were talking at the dinner table. So today we're going to pretend. I almost had a glass of scotch right before this because I'm
Nice.
I'm going through audit stuff, you know, which is like the third audit now as a newly public company, and it was about 3:00 in the afternoon here in Chicago, and I'm just thinking, man, I could just use a drink, but instead I grabbed an espresso to come talk to you. But my man, you've had an extensive career.
Yes,
and
I have.
What's cool is that you're still smiling about everything too. That's one of the things that captured me about you. You know, how did you? Because Attorney General, right? And if I remember right, when we were talking, there was something pretty special about your Supreme Court case. Because was it criminal defense, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, it was. I'm not a criminal defense lawyer. In fact, I had never practiced a day of criminal law in my life until my argument before the United States Supreme Court, which was a Sixth Amendment right to confrontation case. Interestingly, I don't necessarily want to veer off into Trump land, but his prosecution, one of the critical challenges that will be made to the conviction is the Sixth Amendment challenge. And my case was a Sixth Amendment case. So I had to, and again, I had never practiced criminal law, so I had to study the law going back more than 200 years to before the trial of Sir Walter Raleigh, to Roman times before that all addressed the right to confront witnesses against you, right? And this was a case, it was a very touching case. It was a 6-year-old girl who had been sexually molested by her stepfather.
Oh, God.
And at the time of trial, she froze up and refused to testify against the stepfather. So the question was, could the statements that she had made to her mother and to the police and to the hospital come into evidence? And ultimately, there was a case called Ohio versus Roberts that said that if a witness is technically unavailable, and in this case, the judge declared her unavailable because she was 6 and refused to testify, and he wasn't going to force her. And so after declaring her unavailable, the next issue under Ohio versus Roberts was whether or not there was extrinsic evidence of reliability of her statements to third parties, such that those statements to third parties could come into evidence over a hearsay objection. And so anyway, the evidence in this case was that there was physical evidence of a sexual molestation that was developed at the hospital. And so the testimony to the mother and the police and the hospital was let into evidence. And the case, and so he did not have a chance to cross-examine the witness. And so the case, he was convicted in Nevada and sentenced to life. 18 years later, there was another case that overruled Ohio versus Roberts. And the question was, would the new case be applied retroactively or only prospectively? And it was determined that we argued that it should be applied only prospectively because the standard in Ohio versus Roberts was a standard that allowed for justice in that case, and that it wasn't appropriate to redo that case and thousands of other cases that were decided under Ohio versus Roberts, and the court agreed, and ultimately I won that case 9-0.
That's incredible, unanimous too.
Yeah,
it's interesting when you talk about this, and I mean, I may be the only nerd that likes this stuff besides you, right? Everybody listening, I know, loves deep conversations, and I start to think about this because when you're talking about cases, there's so much right in our country that's decided. I mean, even a couple of years ago, right, when you were looking at Roe versus Wade, and how that was overturned.
Right.
Imagine if something like that was applied retrospectively.
Yeah.
I mean, the impact for that. So, I mean, it's intriguing because you can argue one way or the other and take it case by case, obviously, but I believe that the laws of the land, they can change over time, dependent upon where culture and society fits in their own values, or the values collectively as a country, or even globally. If you get into the United Nations, to where it seems like most of it, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, most of it should be applied prospectively, meaning just going forward rather than retrospectively, because people had different feelings and values 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago than they do today.
Sure. So Justice Harlan was the justice that really was the architect of the Supreme Court's retroactivity jurisprudence. And that's a body of case law that goes back about 80 years. And what he said on that subject was that no one, not the litigants, not the plaintiff or the defendant, not society as a whole, not the court system, that no one was well served by having a constant revolving door of litigation that would change and would not provide any level of predictability and certainty in the system. And so cases that are applied retroactively should be very, very rare. And one of the few cases, for example, that was applied retroactively was Gideon versus Wainwright. And what happened in that case was that the criminal defendant facing a death penalty conviction was denied the right to counsel. And so the court said that fundamentally denied him justice. It was he could not have a fair trial without an attorney.
Oh yeah.
And that therefore his case, and the case of anyone who was convicted of capital murder without an attorney, should get a new trial. And so you can see the level of hardship that is required by that body of case law for a case to be applied retroactively. It has to impact a fundamental denial of due process.
Yeah.
And my argument in my case was that the safeguards that were in place with Ohio versus Roberts fundamentally guaranteed a fair trial, even if they were overturned as being not entirely consistent with what the court now felt the law ought to be, that they still guaranteed a fair trial. The extrinsic evidence of reliability requirement, the unavailability of the witness requirement, these were all safeguards that guaranteed a fair trial. And the court agreed 9-0.
That's incredible. Wow. When you look at something like this, because it's there are fundamentals that we have in the law of the land. And I think about what you're talking about, but then I also compare it to something that's been very, very topical over the last couple of years that comes to mind is cannabis. And how different states, of course, Nevada being one of them, of course, are legalized. There's many that have legalized now recreationally. And when a lot of them legalized cannabis recreationally, after it being medically approved for a little while, there were some states, Illinois being one of them, where I'm from in Chicago, where they said, you know what, everybody who is currently imprisoned for some kind of cannabis law that they broke, that was tried, convicted, of course, now those can be overturned. Which was interesting to me because obviously that's very much retrospective. And going back, and I scratch my head for that, man. Because when
that was a legislative determination. Right. That was a legislative determination, as opposed to a court going back and saying that they get new trials. Right. So that was not an application of retroactivity jurisprudence. That was an application of the court, of the legislature, saying times have changed, and what we once thought was illegal, today we're saying is legal. And so if today we're saying it's legal, what social purpose is served by having these people still stay in jail? So that's one issue. The other thing that you talked about, how states have different laws relating to cannabis, that kind of ties into the Roe versus Wade discussion, which is that the court in Roe did not say that abortion should be or should not be legal. What they were basically saying is that it's up to the states to decide this issue. There's nothing in the Constitution that guarantees a right to an abortion. And so let's leave it to the states. That's where it belongs. And let the states decide. There's a theory that goes back to our founding, that the states are the great incubators, the great test markets, if you will, for public policy and for the law. So let's try different things. Let the states try different things. And people will decide with their feet where they want to live. And that will tell us, that will give us, a better indication of what the laws ought to be. If California allows legalization and everybody moves to California, well, then maybe, other states that currently don't allow it might legalize it to attract people back to their state. So it is, I think, a good thing to allow the states to be these incubators and to try these different approaches to the law. And then let's find out what works and what doesn't work, I mean, if state legalized marijuana and everybody started getting in car accidents and it was a hot mess, then that would tell the rest of the states and the federal government not to go in that direction. But if on the other hand, if they legalized it and, it created a booming new industry and didn't increase traffic fatalities at all, maybe it wasn't a bad idea.
For sure. You and I are so much on the same page about that, because if you're going back to our founding fathers, and the whole idea behind having state governments in addition to a federal government is, at least from what I have read and interpret anyways, is everybody here who founded our great country came from England and, under the tyranny of the king. So when they were looking at all this, it's like, of course, George Washington, they were trying to crown him king after the Revolutionary War, and he's like, no, that's not how this is supposed to go. And then, of course, the rest is kind of history with that. But the depth of the state governments coming down to the governors is that, they didn't want one king, so instead, what we actually kind of found out even throughout the pandemic is that we kind of had 50 little kings. With the governors, And I remember talking about this, and I'm like, that's really how I saw it, because we started to see how much power, these incubators that you're talking about had. And I also believe rightfully so, because of how you're discussing it. It's like people in, Texas are not going to think the same as those who are in New York. those who are in California are not going to think the same as those who are in North Dakota. You know, there's different values and plus just different ways of life around different areas of the country for many reasons, you know, geographical, economical, you know, religious, all of these things, you know. So to your point, it's like, well, if you don't like it here, you know, you could go over there to where there's a greater size collective that shares the same values and morals as what you do. You know, and the laws are governed accordingly and written accordingly in those states. It's so, dude, it's so cool how this country was set up. I'm always in awe on the complexity that was just, and the foresight even at that time to start to put these things in place and how it stood the test of time too.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm on a little bit of a cool rant, you know?
I agree with you. I think it was visionary. I think that these were brilliant men. And I think the idea that today certain people are trying to meddle with some of their
I don't think so at all, man.
Design is disturbing.
Yeah,
I love the idea. I love the idea of states as incubators. I'm less enamored with the little king portion of it, but things like trying to hack the Supreme Court that this administration has thrown out, the idea of abolishing the Electoral College. People don't even understand what the Electoral College is all about and why we have it, and yet they're ready to abolish it. They know nothing about it. But it just sounds like it's not a popular vote. It's not democracy, and we ought to do away with it. And what they don't understand is that if we didn't have the Electoral College, there would be 10 states, not 50, that would rule this country.
Yeah, right on.
The Electoral College allows the smaller states to have a voice. And if you want a 50-state union, you have to give those smaller states a voice. You have to give them a way to participate. And if they have no meaningful level of participation, which the Electoral College affords them, then what's to stop them from seceding from the Union and saying, you know what, if these 10 states are going to control everything and I've got no say in anything, then I don't need to be part of the United States of America.
Yeah. Rhode Island's like, I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah. Well, a lot of states, Nevada, would be out. It's interesting. Justice Souter once said that civic ignorance of the issues that we're talking about, is the greatest threat facing America. Because if you don't know, also the attacks on our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court happens to be one of the last bastions of safety and security that we can rely on. I would more quickly rely on decisions coming out of that body than I would on decisions coming out of Congress, or on decisions coming out of state legislators, or decisions coming out of the executive branch. That body, that Supreme Court body, is our greatest protector of our rights. It's not the media anymore, if it ever was. And it's certainly not the executive branch, and it's not Congress, because they're vying for power against one another. And the Supreme Court is the one that keeps everybody on the guardrails of the U.S. Constitution and our guarantees of freedom and our Bill of Rights. They're the ones that make sure that we have all of that on an ongoing basis: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, right? It's the Supreme Court that guarantees all of that.
For sure. They're kind of like the gangsters, right?
The original, the OGs.
You got it right on. They're like, whatever, you can do whatever you want. We're just going to be right over here. We got this. That's hilarious. Yeah. Oh, man. A little topical. I know you said you didn't want to go into Trump land. I would love to hear, because I've read a lot around the due process violations, you know, within that case. And it's not even so much that it's very topical, of course, because right now we're talking, and it's, just a couple months before a presidential election as well. And I mean, this whole country is like, what do we do? And it seems even polls, which I don't really trust polls that much, of course, just because of the sample sizes and how they're typically swaying because of the lists that they gather. But, there's some certain things, and it's like, to me, and I'll make a statement that who knows, maybe it'll come back to bite me in 10 years when I'm in politics, right? But it's the fundamentals of our country, to me anyways, far outweigh, and even the rights of the individuals far outweigh the actual case and topic at hand.
100%.
To me, absolutely, yeah.
It doesn't matter what you think about Donald Trump. What you should be focused on is the preservation of our system of justice and the integrity of our system of justice. That's what we need to all be focused on. It doesn't matter who's there. It doesn't matter if it's Hunter Biden or Donald Trump. What matters is that we have a reverence and a fidelity to the rule of law, and that justice be blind, that it not be partisan, that it not be political, that it be fair and impartial. And that did not happen in the Trump prosecution, right? I'm a nonpartisan. I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. I'm a nonpartisan. I became nonpartisan in 2016, before the Trump election. And today, I will support and vote for Donald Trump because I believe that Biden is a train wreck. I believe he's caused probably more damage to this country than any president in my lifetime. And so I will vote for Donald Trump. I have, obviously, I have serious reservations about Trump's personality in certain instances, some of the things he says. But fundamentally, I believe that he loves America. I believe that the criticism of him for the past 7 or 8 years has been so over the top. 2 failed impeachments, the Mueller investigation, 4 or 5 prosecutions by Democrat prosecutors who are using the law in what they're now calling lawfare, warfare. And, what's wrong with the particular prosecution by the DA, the Manhattan DA, and the judge in New York that sat on that case is, first of all, you've got a DA who said, I'm going to find something to prosecute Donald Trump for. He said that during the election. So it's not like he saw a violation of the law and was unbiased as to the individual. He had a very, very heavy bias against the individual that he campaigned on. And it reminds me of Stalinist era in which they said, you find me the man and I'll find you the crime.
Right on.
In
I
other
remember.
words, you give me the guy's name and I'll find something I can hang on it. Right. And that's pretty much what happened here. And they took 2 misdemeanors. They created this novel legal theory that has no precedent in the law. And then they found a judge, Judge Mirasham, and it's supposed to be a random selection of judges, yet this particular judge keeps getting all the Trump cases, which, is anything but random. His daughter is got a company that generates millions of dollars in campaign donations for Democratic politicians. And he also contributed to the Biden campaign, the judge, and a minor amount, but he contributed. And he contributed to an anti-Trump initiative. And then in his rulings, his rulings towards witnesses that were favorable to the prosecution were very favorable to the prosecution. His rulings against the defense seemed, potentially unjustified. His jury instructions were very questionable.
That's a very polite way to put it there, George.
Yeah. And then specifically on the Sixth Amendment, you're entitled to know what the charges are against you. You are specifically entitled, constitutionally entitled under the Sixth Amendment, to know exactly what you're charged with. And legal scholars like Jonathan Turley and Alan Dershowitz today are saying that they still do not know what Trump was convicted of, because there were these 2 misdemeanors that could be paired with any one of 3 additional crimes. And you're also required to convict a criminal defendant unanimously. right? So all 12 jurors have to arrive at the same verdict, the same decision. Well, if the judge is telling you you have multiple choice, you can choose crime A, crime B, or crime C. And if the jury instructions don't require the jurors to come back and say which of the three crimes they relied on, then we don't know to this day what the pairing was that ultimately 12 people agreed on. And arguably, 12 people did not agree on any particular pairing. You could have had 4 jurors that thought it was crime A, 4 that thought it was crime B, and 4 that thought it was crime C, which would not give you a unanimous verdict. So there are a number of Sixth Amendment violations that occurred in that trial. There are a number of conflicts of interest and bias challenges that are relevant to that trial. And then, there's the whole idea of how this is done during an election year. This happened 8 years ago. It was turned down by the Justice Department for prosecution. They said, we're not going to take this dog of a case. Alvin Bragg even said, I'm not going to, take a case where I've got to put Cohen on as my star witness. He turned down the case. But all of a sudden in 2024, during a presidential election year, the main contender for the Republican nomination is targeted not by just Alvin Bragg, but by all these Democratic prosecutors. It's clearly election interference. There's no question in my mind that it's election interference. And ultimately, the thing is that the Supreme Court will sort all this out at the end of the day, but the election will be over by then. And so what you've got a horrible misuse of the justice system in warfare. And that should scare all of us, because there, but for the grace of God, go you, And if it can be used against a guy like Donald Trump running for president, the law can be twisted and used against anyone. And what's more important than, I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump and how much you want to prevent him from getting into office. What's more important is our respect for the institution of the judicial system and our respect for the rule of law, and that it be applied fairly and without fear or favor and dispassionately. And that is not happening in Donald Trump's case. So again, I'm not on his fan club. I will vote for him. Because I think he's vastly superior, but mostly because I think he is more capable of extracting us from a near global catastrophe that this administration has gotten us into with Russia and Ukraine and China, and what's happening in Gaza and what's likely to happen next. I mean, we gave the green light. The Biden administration gave the green light. First of all, there's Nord Stream 2. There's the sabotage of Nord Stream 2. We were arguably behind, or certainly had a hand in, which is against international law, and is enough to, make a country go to war against us, and is an act of war, frankly. But beyond that, beyond sending the Ukrainians F-16s and Patriot missiles and cluster bombs and over $100 billion in aid, beyond confiscating Russia's $200+ billion in assets and starting to give those to the Ukrainian government, we recently gave the Ukrainian government the green light to fire missiles into Russia, U.S. missiles into Russia. And if that's not an act of war, I don't know what is. And the very first thing that the Ukrainians target is a Russian nuclear early warning radar facility.
Right.
So, I mean, what kind of a signal is that sending? If you're a general,
you can connect the dots.
If you're a general in Russia, what are you telling Vladimir Putin, right? You're telling him that we are in World War III. Wake up. We're in World War III. They've already taken out. Why are they taking out our early warning nuclear radar system, if not to launch a nuclear attack. Someone over in Russia, I would bet, is already counseling Putin that he ought to launch a preemptive nuclear attack on the United States, because if he doesn't, he may not have time, because a nuclear attack is inevitable.
You got it.
So the idea that this administration is taking us to the edge of the abyss on nuclear war, that in and of itself is reason to vote for Donald Trump, no matter what you think of him, because Trump is a pragmatist and he's anti-war. Trump will cut a deal. And Putin and Chairman Xi can negotiate with Trump. They have no trust in the Biden administration, so they can't negotiate very effectively with the Biden administration, but they could negotiate with Trump. So I'm voting for Donald Trump to avert World War III. That, in my opinion, is the biggest reason today to vote for Donald Trump.
I completely understand.
I'm not a fan.
Right on.
This is where I'm falling on this decision.
Yeah, I know. Even last week there were Russian warships that are now around Cuba.
Oh yeah,
and I think that were just sent there. Because of a lot of these things. Of course they're for exercises, but we all know what that means.
Yeah, well, Putin said, I'm going to send missiles around the world to those who object to U.S. policy.
Yeah.
And if you continue in this vein, then you will have incoming from all over the world.
Yeah.
Right? You look at the growth of the BRICS alliance, right?
Oh, yeah.
That they've got 40 new members that are lined up, including Mexico and Cuba. So and they're coming out with a new global currency that could undermine the U.S. dollar. So, I mean, and then you've got 10 million people that, in the midst of all of this, in the midst of a 50-year pivot on our relationship with China, passing the CHIPS Act, creating hostility with China, creating hostility with another nuclear power, Russia. In the midst of all of that, you let 10 million undocumented people come into our southern border. And then you say that they've been fully vetted, but we just arrested 8 Tajikistan terrorists in Philadelphia, LA, and New York. And then another guy just with a trunk full of weapons just got arrested in the news today. We're going to see more and more of that. There are probably thousands of terrorists that have come across the southern border under the Biden administration. Honestly, I don't know why the man isn't being impeached for treason. I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
I don't know if he exactly has all of his faculties about him.
Yeah, I don't think he does.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's in control either.
I'm with you. Yeah, that's very true. I start to think, as you're looking on who to vote for, is if you look at it, if I were to think back to when I was maybe, 18 years old, 19 years old, if I'm there, typically 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, they don't have much money, and all of a sudden, you're driving a beater car to get you back and forth to work, and that thing blows up on you. And you're at the point to where you don't have a lot of budget, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I need to find myself some transportation. Because I need to continue on with life. I need to continue making a living.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are my choices? I have maybe $10,000 to spend, or $5,000, whatever. I can't go over that. And you're taking a look right here, and you've got this. It might be another beater, right? But maybe it's a vehicle that has, you find one that has low miles. Maybe it was just driven by, I don't know, a 90-year-old woman for 3 years, that only drove to CVS and back, every day. Or you've got this Mercedes that's next to it, that grandmother car was probably maybe 5 years old, right? That's it. But it's a lower end car. Maybe it's a Hyundai, something like that, right? But you have this 25-year-old Mercedes that's right next to it that has 300,000 miles on it. That has all these hits on the Carfax report for repairs and all these other things. But you're like, you know what? I think I want to go with the Mercedes just because it's a Mercedes. I don't care that the thing's broken down 50 times over the last 2 years. It's like I'm gonna look good, and something just because it's a Mercedes. But then you're right back in the same boat. It's like, and of course I'm comparing I'm comparing Biden to the Mercedes right now, President Biden to the Mercedes. Yeah. But you got this thing over here that might squeal a bit.
Too much credit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
you give him too much credit.
Maybe, but
I would have somehow made Biden the old beater.
That's funny, but I'll tell you, man.
Trump the Mercedes.
If you don't know much about him, I'll give him this, right? If you don't know much about him, you just see a photo of him. He's kind of dapper for like an 80-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Visually, he looks okay until he speaks or moves.
He washes up well.
Yeah, right. Until he speaks or moves, then it's just, thanks for joking with me. But the Hyundai over there, it's like, it might squeal, right? And then there's Trump, right? Because I used to say, like, the guy's so intelligent, why doesn't he just shut his freaking mouth sometimes, But that's it. It's like, to your points, he can accomplish things and has shown that he's accomplished things, even in the midst of squealing down the road every 2 minutes, but he just keeps on going. That's the difference. It's like you're in the middle of two less than ideal choices.
Yeah. Rick, can I tell your audience about something?
Please go for it. Yeah.
That I think they need to know about.
Yeah, go for it, man.
Okay, so first of all, theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking told us before he died that the singularity would be the greatest event in human history. And the singularity is that moment in time when machine intelligence eclipses human intelligence.
Oh, man.
He said it would be the greatest event ever, greater than fire, greater than the wheel, greater than anything. So now you've got the head of AI for Google, a guy named Ray Kurzweil, and he tells us that this moment in time that Hawking was talking about could come as early as 2029. Elon Musk says it could come in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
So the greatest event in human history is around the corner. Whether it's 2 years away or 5 years away, we are about to experience the greatest event in human history, something beyond the level of the discovery of fire and the wheel.
Yeah, it's called Skynet Space from Terminator. I'm kidding.
Or anything, right?
Yep.
Right. Now, Kurzweil goes on to say that by the 2040s, AI will not be our equal, which is the singularity. Yeah. By the 2040s, 20 years away, it will be a billion times more capable than human intelligence. Now, I would argue that the human brain lacks the capacity to even comprehend what an intelligence that is a billion times its own represents for humanity. But we know it's going to be seismic, tectonic, right? So we have a major, huge development that's going to be seismic and tectonic within the next 5 years. And then within the next 20 years, we've got something that's off the charts, right? So this is the world that we are living in today, okay? Now, Musk and Hawking have also said, and others have said, that AI could also spell the end of the human race, that it is more powerful and potentially more deadly than nuclear weapons, right? Now, the issue is when we're giving these analogies about the cars, right? Imagine giving a Ferrari and putting a baby behind the wheel, right? We're the baby. We're the baby and AI is the Ferrari, right? We don't know how to drive, right? Another analogy might be you've got a room full of infants and as toys, you throw in a box of grenades, right? with the pins, that they can pull, right? That's probably even a better analogy because, the baby might not be able to drive the Ferrari and kill itself, but it can pull one of those pins, right? So we've got this AI technology. So we're smart enough to create it. The question is, are we smart enough to control it?
Yeah.
Right? And so, and I would argue, no, we are not smart enough to control it. And so one of the urgent priorities, I believe, is for humanity to evolve. Normally, evolution takes time, takes millions of years, takes hundreds of years, centuries, decades. It doesn't happen in a 5-year period. And yet that's exactly what needs to happen. We need to raise the level of consciousness, not only in this country, but in the world, to be able to get along and coexist with one another, right? On both a domestic level and an international level,
Yeah.
which means we need to end our division. We need to end our fighting. We need to end wars. We are living in a post-nuclear, pre-singularity environment. War is a relic of the past. It should have no place in our future or today, because the wars that will be fought with the weapons that we already have and that are soon to become available to us are existential threats to our existence, right? They are existence-ending potential instruments of our extinction. And so I'm currently embarked on trying to raise people's consciousnesses, right?
I love it. Yeah.
To become more self-transcendent. And what self-transcendent means is basically to not care so much about yourself, but to care more about others, about our future, about humanity, about the human species, about the planet, right? To be self-transcendent, to get beyond yourself, right? And that's really what we need to do. Now, I have the benefit of being 65 years old, right? And so I'm a little bit more evolved, a little bit more mature, than your average guy, right? Or your average young person. And so I'm trying to get people to understand, Milton Friedman was a Nobel-winning, prize-winning economist at the University of Chicago, very famous conservative economist. And he won his Nobel Prize for a very simple observation, which is that people operate out of self-interest. If you want somebody to do something for you, tell them how it is in their self-interest to do it, and they are more likely to do it, right? So what I want your viewers to understand is that it is in their self-interest to become more self-transcendent. It is in their interest, their personal interest, to end division. It is in their personal self-interest to open their minds. Frank Zappa said that a mind is like a parachute. It doesn't work if it isn't open. To open their minds, to listen to opposing views, opposing perspectives, right? Because our individual views have no privileged legitimacy. We see the world not as it is, but as we are, through our own unique prisms, based on our own personal experience, our own history, the books we've read, the movies we've seen, the classes we've attended, the parents we had, which are very different than, somebody in war-torn Syria. So they naturally have a very different perspective of the world than we have. And what happens is that neither one of those, they're like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Your little view of the world, imagine it as one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. You don't have the whole picture. You have a piece of the picture. And what you want is to look at these other pieces of the jigsaw puzzle so that you can triangulate towards the truth, so that you can piece together the full picture and understand the truth, right? You need to start looking at alternative perspectives not as threats, but as assets. Right? So this is, a bit of wisdom that I wanted to impart to your audience from a 65-year-old complex problem solver who's been looking at these issues and studying these issues for decades. And this is where I've come down. I don't, Aristotle said the man who thinks he knows everything knows nothing at all. And the first sign of wisdom, in my view, is when you come to recognize that you don't know shit. Right? I don't know shit. And if I don't know shit, you don't know shit. So once you recognize that, you then understand the need to learn, to unlearn, and to relearn. Alvin Toffler said, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. It will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. We all have to engage in lifelong learning. We all have to develop a love of learning. We all have to learn, unlearn the garbage that we have in our heads and relearn the truth through triangulating by bringing in alternative perspectives and listening to what other people think. So I hope that this alternative perspective has enriched your audience somewhat. And I would encourage them to seek out more alternative perspectives.
I love it, George. Thank you. That's incredible. I know that everybody listening will. And they also need to read your book, Millennial Samurai, because there's a lot of good wisdom in there, too, that I was finding.
You.
My goodness.
Thank you.
I want to end today talking just very briefly about that, because when we were sitting at dinner, bringing this full circle now, and you told me there was 188 chapters. Is that accurate? 188?
182.
182 chapters. I was like, dude, who writes a book with 182 chapters?
Yeah.
But then it was you told me the concept, and it was almost like your book was put together like YouTube shorts or like Instagram reels.
Yeah.
So consumable, man. How did you get the idea for that? I know you told me, but I want to hear from your own mouth again for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I know, look, we have these phones, right? And we are now kind of predisposed to want instant gratification, right? And we have shorter attention spans as a consequence of constantly strolling through information after information from multiple sources. And this is how we now consume a lot of our information. So the way I wrote Millennial Samurai is with 182 chapters that are only 1 to 3 pages each. And the idea is, I can tell you that out of all the things that I've ever done in my life, this book is the most important thing. Oh. And it is the most important thing that I leave my daughter and my nieces and my nephews. And every parent, if you go on Amazon and you read the reviews, they'll tell you that this should be in every home in America. They'll tell you that it's a secular Bible for the 21st century. The reviews are off the top, and just crazy. But every parent should get this for their children. And if you can't afford it, on Amazon, it's $29. If you can't afford it, you can go to millennialsamurai.com and you can download the entire book for free.
Oh, wow.
Right? I want everyone to have this. I want 1 million people or more to download this book. 14,000 people are already ahead of the curve because they have downloaded the book. The book, it's like if I were to drop you off in the Amazon rainforest and I were going to give you a duffel bag, you could tell me what ought to go in that duffel bag, right? This, if I'm going to drop my daughter off on the sidewalk in the middle of the 21st century, this is the duffel bag that I'm leaving her. And more than the house, more than the stocks, more than the money, there's nothing I will leave my daughter that is more important than this book. So I really encourage people to go out and get it. It will prepare you for the technological tsunami that's coming. It will give you greater insights. It will teach you how to be more adaptable and anti-fragile. It will give you inspiration, guidance, and direction. It will speak to you on many different levels. And whether you download it for free or whether you get the hard copy, for every hard copy you buy, a young person who can't afford it gets one of these for free. Oh. So if you can afford the $29 to go buy the book, you're putting one of these books in the hands of a young person who needs it. And this is how we change the world, is one thing at a time. We get purpose-driven leaders who start making contributions, who, maybe they're a little bit older, maybe they're more focused on legacy. And that's where I find myself, right? I'm a little bit older and I'm more focused on legacy. And some young people say, okay, boomer, we don't need to listen. That's such a mistake. That's such a mistake.
Agree. Yep.
This phone that you guys are hanging out with, we invented these.
Yep. You got it.
So we did fuck up on a lot of things. We have a dysfunctional government that we're leaving you with. We have, wars that we've been involved in and become addicted to, but we've also done some great things. Yeah. And so some of us still want to do great things and some of us want to help you because we recognize that younger generations are our future. right? As humanity encounters
sure
this
is.
technological tsunami,
Yeah.
it's the millennials, the Gen X, and the Gen Z that will be at the tip of the spear. So what do we need to do? We need to empower them, right? We don't need to diss them or criticize them. We need to empower them. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to empower young people and change the world one person at a time.
George, you're amazing. I am grateful and better off for knowing you, having to have met you. Thank you for coming on. You're a futurist, you're becoming a good friend, and man, you're just full of wisdom. Thank you for how you look at the world, brother.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show, and thank you for introducing me to your loyal audience. And it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I really am grateful.